Today I want to talk about Ray Bradbury's writing advice. His work spanned many genres and he won numerous awards, and I was able to find quite a few pearls of wisdom from interviews with him. So here's a few of Ray Bradbury's tips for writers. Number 1, you must never think at the typewriter, you must feel. Your intellect is always buried in that feeling anyway. Obviously there's always going to be some thinking when you're sitting down and writing a story, but I think essentially I'm going to take this as meaning don't overthink. And I think that is really useful advice. I tend to write by feel myself. I'm not a big outliner or a big planner. I tend to just see what feels right and follow that. Before I discovered that about myself and that was the approach that worked for me when it came to writing, I spent a lot of time overthinking. I'd think about whether I was hitting the structure I needed to hit, or whether this was in the right place, or this needed to happen here or elsewhere, or whether it was exciting enough, was it tense enough. All of these considerations were going on in my mind, and I found it almost impossible to just get anything written like that. And of course, not everybody's like me. Some people do write by thinking and planning and being really accurate and detailed, and I think, both approaches result in some brilliant stories. There is no correct approach, as I've said many times on this channel, but the advice of not overthinking, I think, can be useful whatever approach you take to writing. There's always going to be little doubts in everything that you write. Every project is going to have small imperfections and things that you wish you could change, or you don't know how to change, or did you really come at that the right way? And it's easy to spend a lot of time rereading and thinking and wondering where to go next and trying to plan 5 steps ahead of yourself when you haven't quite figured out the step that you're on. It's a minefield. All of that stuff that relies on thinking can really slow you down if you can't figure it out. So in that way, I think not overthinking is really good advice, but you can't underthink either. If you write by feel like I do, it's a balance of two things, as is most stuff when it comes to writing. But I write by feel, so I would say that. Some people might not write by feel whatsoever, and in that case this advice might not make any sense at all, but it does to me. Number 2, if you get the big truth, the small truths will accumulate around it. I like this one a lot, and as I tend to do a lot with these writing advice from famous authors, I found 2 meanings for this tip. The first one is really the one I reached first, the big truth and the small truth. It's about the meaning of what you're writing, the message, or what you want to achieve by writing your story. The second meaning, I think, can be found in the actual writing, the actual step-by-step, sentence-by-sentence writing. The first interpretation feels to me like it was probably the one that Ray Bradbury meant when he said this, but I think he's talking about how, as writers, we have to handle big issues or meanings or messages one piece at a time. When you do have a big message that you want to put into your writing, it's really hard to think how you'll piece that together using a plot and a story. It's a really hard thing to do. You can't just sit and think, okay, I'll say this and that will get my message across. It's not made up like that. It is made up of all these small moments that point towards it. They're all tiny little chips in the sculpture that finally reveal the shape of it at the end. But in order to do that, like he says, you have to know the big truth so that those small truths can all contribute towards it. You have to know what you mean, or what you want to write about, or what your message is. However, the thing to remember about that, especially from a newer writer's point of view, is that you don't have to have this from day one. You can find that truth, that big truth, halfway through your book or at the end of it. You might not know what the message is until you finish reading the book, and that's all right. That's okay, you can completely do that. That was something that held me back fairly early on, because I thought, well, what am I writing this for? What matters about it? And I couldn't always find that, but I knew I liked the story, so I just kept writing it. And eventually something always did come to me. Something always revealed itself that this story was about. And it was through those small truths. I think sometimes they revealed the big truth, but I think definitely as long as you find that big truth either at the end or at the beginning, all those small truths then can contribute towards it. And then obviously the second interpretation is about how you build all of that, how you write a story and how you make everything make sense, and how you make multiple plot lines slowly advance throughout the course of the book. You can't just do it in one big piece. It has to be loads of small pieces that make up the whole. But if you know what that story is that you want to tell, then you can see how all those small pieces go together. So I definitely agree with how he says if you get the big truth, the smaller truths accumulate around it. But I think the opposite can be true as well. I think small truths can build a picture of what that big truth might be. So Good advice. Number 3. If you have writer's block, you can cure it this evening by stopping what you're doing and writing something else. You picked the wrong subject. This one feels quite harsh to me. It's a little bit of tough love perhaps, and I don't necessarily agree that writer's block is always because you're writing about the wrong subject or you're writing the wrong thing. In my experience, which is of course in no way comparable to Ray Bradbury's, I'll just point that out, I tend to find writer's block comes because I've taken a wrong turn in something, not necessarily that the whole thing itself is wrong. I tend to find if I've taken the plot in a certain direction or taken a character down a certain road that they shouldn't have really gone down, that's when I tend to get stuck. The inspiration runs out. The vague idea of where I want things to go has veered off in another direction and I need to follow that instead of this new path that doesn't have anything pre-thought out. I would agree though, if you've got writer's block, you do need to stop and at least go back a bit. Even if that's not scrapping the whole project and writing something totally different, even if it's just going back a chapter or two. I've said this before, but most of the time if you retrace your steps and allow a character to make a different decision, or make a different decision yourself, that can often lead to you finding that path back to the rest of the story. Sometimes it comes down to time and experience as well. Even if that experience is just having written one more story the next week, sometimes that's enough for you to go back and find a way to finish the previous one because you've learned a little bit more or you learned something that might help you. So I don't necessarily agree that it's the wrong subject, but I definitely think you might be approaching it in slightly the wrong way. So I half agree, half disagree with that one. Number 4, you've got to jump off the cliff all the time and build your wings on the way down. Definitely agree with this one. In terms of advancement and getting better and learning to write, there is no substitute for writing. I talk to a lot of writers and find that quite a few of them are stuck in analysis paralysis. Before they've even written a paragraph or a chapter of their book, they're thinking about, does it have the potential to do this? Will it be long enough? Have I approached this in the correct way? And all of that stuff needs to be figured out, but it doesn't need to be figured out right now. You've got time to let that stuff drop into place. The phrase I use when it comes to this kind of thing, which is a bit of a cliche, but I find it's useful, is the question of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You can't just chomp that entire elephant in one go. You can't expect yourself to be equipped to do that. It's just impossible. You have to do it line by line. That's what Stephen King has said before. When someone asked him, how did you write that book? He said, one word at a time. And it sounded sarcastic, but really, it's true when you think about it. You don't have to choose all of those perfect words in one go and have the story be complete. The great thing about writing is you're just not required to get it right first time, or second time, or third time. You just don't have to do it. But a lot of beginners I find treat themselves exactly like that. They write a chapter and expect to immediately know whether they have any innate talent with writing, or whether this is something they're supposed to be doing, or whether they can do it or they can't, in one chapter, in the first thing they've ever written. No one ever learned anything that way. It's a cycle. Learn, write, repeat. Learn, write, repeat. Stories never come out perfectly first time. And if you are falling off that cliff and you fall all the way down to the bottom, that's all right. Because you can just reverse time and go back up to the top and try again and make different decisions on the way down this time. And nobody needs to know about it apart from you. You are going to need to build those wings on the way down, because before you write anything, you've no idea how big those wings need to be or how far you want them to take you. I'd say try not to think about writing a novel, if that's what you're doing, as writing a novel. Think of it as writing a chapter, and then another chapter and another chapter. It's a lot more manageable and it's a lot easier, and your expectations of yourself can be reduced a lot. So the pressure comes down. Allow yourself to build those wings on the way down. Don't expect everything to be perfect up front, because it isn't for anyone. So definitely agree with that. Number 5, to fail is to give up, but you're in the midst of a moving process. Nothing fails then, all goes on. This is something I strongly believe in, and probably something I've talked about a lot on this channel already, but as long as you're still writing and you're still trying, there's no such thing as failure. Even if you get to the end of a novel or a story and you don't like anything about it, and you want to just throw it away without even editing it, which I've done on several occasions, it's still not a failure, because you practiced skills in that, you learned new things, even if you don't necessarily recognize that in yourself. You leveled up slightly as a writer from writing that, and all of that experience is worth having, and it's just adds to your writing acumen, I suppose. Gonna check that acumen means what I think it means. Kind of. The experience of writing something that doesn't end up working, I think, is equally, or if not more important than writing something that does work. How else, other than making mistakes, are we going to figure out what doesn't work or what to avoid in the future? And of course, it's really discouraging when you finish writing something and you feel like it wasn't worth the time and energy that you put into it. I'm not saying that you're going to finish something and feel like that and then think, but I feel great because I learned so much from it. I mean, people don't really work like that. You're probably more likely to want to throw your computer at the wall. It's alright to feel miserable about what you feel like was probably a waste of time, but all I'm saying is it probably wasn't as much of a waste of time as you think. You probably did still learn valuable stuff that you'll take with you onto future stories, and future stories will be better for it, unless you completely give up. And I'm not talking about taking 3 months off or 6 months off or a year off, because a lot of people beat themselves up for not writing regularly, but as long as you do come back to it, everything that you learned will still be there. You'll still have all those skills and you'll still be able to warm up and get back to where you were eventually. I'm talking about stopping forever and thinking, I'm no good at this, I can't do it. The smallest amount of effort and energy towards writing, even if it's just something like watching a video like this, you're still helping yourself in some way. You're still working towards that end goal. If you need to start out small, just watching videos and stuff, that's great. But I would urge you to put pen to paper as soon as you can and just start that writing journey, I suppose. But whatever you do, don't stop completely, because that, I do believe, as Ray Bradbury says, is the only failure when it comes to writing. So I definitely agree with that. I hope this was useful. If it was, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching as always, and happy writing.